along with his kindred, had been duly authorized to be adopted into Hiram Smith's family. Maybe a bit strange, but nevertheless true. For decades, Grandma Anna Sophia taught Relief Society. She was also the treasurer of that organization for many years. Aunt Henriette was also very involved with the Relief Society. In 1899, when President Lorenzo Snow visited southern Utah settlements en route to St. George, the Beckstrand family traveled to Fillmore to hear him speak. The Apostle Abraham Owen Woodruff, son of President Wilford Woodruff, was traveling to St. George with President Snow. After the meeting, Owen Woodruff and his wife returned to Meadow and stayed the night with the Beckstrand family. Grandpa Elias August spent his entire life in service to his family, community, and church. As mentioned, he served a 2-year mission in Sweden. After settling in Meadow, he served as the superintendent of the Sunday school. During the division of the farmland in Meadow, he asked the town supervisor to grant 40 acres of land with 6 shares of water to the Sunday school. The proceeds from the acreage was intended to purchase books for the Sunday school. Because of the foresight of Elias August Beckstrand, the Meadow Sunday School was the first in the Millard Stake to be supplied with lesson books and songbooks. On November 25, 1901, Elias August Beckstrand was ordained as the patriarch of the Millard Stake, a calling he held for the rest of his life. After having been confined to his room for the greater part of the winter, and then to his bed for weeks, my great-great-grandpa, Elias August Beckstrand, passed away in his home February 26, 1910. He was 77 years old. My great-great-grandma, Anna Sophia Beckstrand, suffered from a chronic cough from the time of her youth when she washed clothes in the Baltic Sea. Although a very hard worker, faithful wife, and mother, she continually battled poor health. Anna Sophia Beckstrand passed away July 8, 1890, at the age of 57. Always devoted to her husband, family, and church, Henrietta Cecilia Beckstrand passed away in the home of her daughter, Rachel, on September 6, 1923. She was 72 years old. Joseph Conrad Beckstrand was born March 10, 1870, in Meadow, Utah. While in his childhood, Great-Grandpa Joe was ill much of the time, but as he matured, he became a stout, strong man. In fact, he didn't suffer any serious illness for the rest of his life. I cannot imagine that Grandpa Joe's childhood was ever lonely. Besides his 2 older sisters and older brother, he had 8 half-siblings. All of the members of his large, extended family loved and respected each other throughout their lives. As a young man, Grandpa Joe hauled freight in Utah and Nevada. The freighters were local ranchers, farmers, and merchants who wanted to expand the market for the goods they produced. During the late 1800s, one of the most profitable places to sell their goods was the silver mining town of Frisco, Utah. Frisco was an agriculturally desolate town of approximately 4,000 people. It was located about 95 miles southwest of Meadow, so a fully loaded wagon and team could take Grandpa Joe up to 7 days to complete the round trip. During the summer, Grandpa Joe and his half-brother Alma hauled apples from their father's orchard to Nevada. After his marriage, Grandpa Joe farmed during the summer months, but in the winter months he continued to haul freight to Nevada. It's a good thing that Grandpa Joe had grown to be a strong, resourceful man, because during his years as a freighter, he had to navigate very limited water sources, wild animals, outlaws, bad roads, and inclement weather. Once the railroad was built, his freighting experiences ended. Before I go any further, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our Bennett side of the family. I'll start with my third great-grandparents, Benjamin Bennett II and Catherine Jones Bennett. They are Grandma Emmaline's paternal grandparents. Benjamin and Catherine were from Connah's Key, Flintshire, Wells. It was said that Catherine was a lovely young girl with dark hair when she married Benjamin Bennett on New Year's Eve, 1818. Catherine and Benjamin were deeply religious and taught their 6 children to have faith. Sometime prior to 1840, John Jones, Catherine's father, had a vision or dream in which he saw some men coming to his family with a book and a new gospel. John Jones told his son-in-law, Benjamin Bennett, about his dream and promised Benjamin that when these men did come, as he was certain they would, that he and his family would join their church and go to a new land. He also told Benjamin that when in this new land, he would see copper-colored people. On October 31st, 1840, Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball, apostles from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, took a short trip to Hawarden Parish. As they preached, John Jones recognized these men from his dream. He told his family that this was the true church of our Lord Jesus Christ. John Jones was an elderly man of 80 years and was sick in bed much of the time. Nevertheless, he insisted that his family take him to be baptized. On August 20th, 1841, John Jones, his daughter Catherine, and her husband Benjamin, and several other family members were baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Over the next 10 years, many of the remaining family members joined the church. For nearly 2 decades, the Bennett family home was used as a meeting place for church members in the area. John Jones, my 4th great-grandfather, died in 1859, never fulfilling his dream of joining the saints in Utah. However, shortly after his death, his daughter Catherine and her husband Benjamin and their youngest daughter Elizabeth were able to begin their journey to America. It was decided that their other family members would follow later when they had earned the money necessary for the trip. Along with 730 fellow converts to the church, Catherine, Benjamin, and Elizabeth Bennett sailed aboard the ship William Tapscott, leaving Liverpool, England, May 11, 1860. After arriving in New York, they traveled by train to Florence, Nebraska. On July 20th, 1860, the William Budge Wagon Company departed Florence, Nebraska, en route to the Salt Lake Valley. Among the 400 individuals in the company were 21-year-old Elizabeth Bennett, her 63-year-old father Benjamin, and her nearly 68-year-old mother, Catherine. It's difficult for me to imagine what the migration from Wales to the Utah Territory must have entailed for 67-year-old Catherine. What a faithful, courageous, determined woman she must have been. Sadly, just after passing into the Utah Territory, the journey became too much for Catherine Jones Bennett. She passed away and was laid to rest near a creek called the Little Muddy in present-day Wyoming. The Bennett family was only about 100 miles from the Salt Lake Valley. In 1998, Grandma Bennett's descendants dedicated a commemorative monument near her burial site. 8 days after Catherine's death, Benjamin and his daughter Elizabeth arrived in Salt Lake City. The following year, on February 16, 1861, they were in the endowment house to have their ordinances performed. Soon afterward, the Bennett family moved to Fillmore in Millard County. Meanwhile, back in Wales, John Bennett, Benjamin and Catherine's oldest son, was employed as a sea captain. In fact, he launched the steam clipper, the Royal Charter, in 1855. It was the second greatest ship in the world at that time. John's wife, Jane Roberts Bennett, christened the ship, breaking a bottle of champagne over its bow. However, the ship didn't enjoy much luck, and fortunately, John Bennett was not assigned to captain her in October of 1859, because while returning to Liverpool from Melbourne, Australia, the ship ran aground, killing 450 individuals, the highest death toll of any shipwreck on the Welsh coast. Captain John's wife, Jane Roberts Bennett, was born in Shotton, Flintshire, Wales. Her mother died when she was just 8 years old, leaving the family in the care of her older sister Mary. Tragically, Mary was drowned in the River Dee when a heavy storm capsized the boat she occupied. So, after Mary's death, Jane's Aunt Elizabeth, lovingly known as Aunt Betsy, came to stay with the Roberts children. When Jane was about 14 years old, she went to work as a dairymaid on a farm near her home. Her duties included milking the cows, making butter and cheese, collecting the eggs, and making bread for the household. At the age of 19, Jane Roberts married John Bennett. John was an exceptional mariner, but was not yet a sea captain. As a young man, John ran a boat on the River Dee. Besides fishing, he used his boat to haul paving stones up the river. These stones were used to pave the streets of Chester, one of the oldest cities in England. Eventually, John and Jane Bennett were the proud parents of 11 children. They worked very hard and sacrificed much in order to earn enough money to join John's parents in the Utah Territory. John, Jane, and their 9 children left Connaught Key, Wales, for America in May of 1863. During their voyage, measles broke out among the passengers, causing the death of 29 children. Tragically, one of them was 5-year-old John Bennett. It was terrible for the Bennett family to submit the body of their little boy to a watery grave in the Atlantic Ocean. After a voyage of 49 days, the Bennett family arrived in New York Harbor. Because of the Civil War, it was difficult to find transportation. Eventually, they took a train to St. Joseph, Missouri. Then, they traveled up the Missouri River by steamboat until they arrived in Florence, Nebraska. There, they purchased 2 yoke of oxen, 1 cow, 1 tent, a wagon, and other provisions necessary to cross the plains. The Bennett family was anxious to arrive in Utah and could hardly wait to see their folks. They had not heard any word from Benjamin, Catherine, or Elizabeth since their departure 3 years earlier. Benjamin and Lizzie were in Salt Lake City to meet them upon their arrival, But it wasn't until then that they learned about Catherine's death. In fact, most of Catherine's children had unknowingly passed by their mother's grave as they trekked to the Salt Lake Valley. Just 2 weeks after arriving in Salt Lake, John and Jane Bennett and their 8 children were sent to Fillmore, Utah, arriving near the end of October 1863. Then, in the spring of 1864, the entire Bennett family moved to Deseret. Now, we know from our Beckstrand history that living in Deseret was difficult and miserable. Again, I cannot imagine the shock of leaving the often cloudy, wet, green climate of Wales and agreeing to settle in the West Millard Desert. Grandma Jane's relatives back in Wales pleaded with her to come back to them. They even offered to send her sufficient money to pay for the entire family to return. But Jane answered, "Not for all the world would I return. I came here for the gospel's sake." While living in Deseret, the Bennett family went without proper food, often only having greasewood greens to eat. Bread and sugar were extremely scarce. They had no fruit other than native currants. They were destitute for clothing. Captain John often attended church with bare feet. Nevertheless, when Fort Deseret was being built, Captain John Bennett and his 4 sons helped with its construction. While living in Fort Deseret, Jane delivered their 10th child, a son they named William. 3 years later, the Bennett family moved from Fort Deseret and settled in Buttermilk Fort. Later, the name Buttermilk Fort was changed to Holden. By this time, Captain John Bennett's health had begun to fail. Being a seafaring man, he was not accustomed to the type of work he was doing in Millard County. It was hoped that the move to Holden would help him improve, but any recovery he made was short-lived. In January of 1869, John and Jane Bennett's 11th child was born. They named her Emmaline. With the birth of baby Emmaline, there were 10 members of the Bennett family living in one log room: John, Jane, and 8 of their children. When baby Emmaline was just 15 months old, her father passed away. He was just 47 years old. Life was especially difficult for Grandma Jane after the untimely death of her husband John. She struggled to support her family, but she was determined to be strong and to move forward. She was resolute in raising her children to be good American citizens and faithful members of the church. My great-grandma, Emmaline, said that at the time of her father's death, 2 of her sisters and 1 brother were married, leaving her mother with 7 children at home. Her brother, Edward, who was not yet married, became the father figure. In fact, Grandma Emmaline said that her brother Edward was the only father she ever knew. Grandma Jane Roberts Bennett supported her family as best she could. She understood the value of herbs as medicine and took up practical nursing. She was always in demand when sickness plagued family members, friends, or even cattle. She was invaluable in nursing the people of Holden through the terrible typhoid and diphtheria epidemics. In fact, just 2 weeks before she died, Grandma Jane helped deliver a baby. Grandma Jane Bennett was always busy. For years, she milked her own cow. She made beautiful handkerchiefs, aprons, and other pieces of handiwork for family and friends. She always remembered her grandchildren with birthday cards, Valentine's Day cards, and other little trinkets. Her grandchildren lovingly recalled that she was one of the sweetest, most kind people they ever knew. I've recently learned that Wales is known as the land of song, and that the Welsh people are known for being great singers. Apparently that was true of the John and Jane Bennett family. They were often called on to sing at town events and for many funerals. One local man said that he would travel 8 miles and back just to hear the Bennett family sing the old Welsh songs and the Mormon hymns. Grandma Jane Bennett served as a counselor in the Relief Society for over 25 years and was serving in that calling at the time of her death. As she approached her twilight years, Grandma Bennett began suffering poor health. She had been a widow for 35 years. She had tended to her children, grandchildren, friends, and townspeople for decades, paying particular attention to the widows and the fatherless. Grandma Bennett was true to the principles of the gospel. She was a wonderful wife, mother, and grandmother. She instilled honesty and love into the hearts of her family and friends. My great-great-grandma, Jane Roberts Bennett, passed away on April 17, 1905, in Holden, Utah. She was just 3 months shy of her 81st birthday. My great-grandma, Emmaline Bennett, was born January 17, 1869, in Holden, Utah. She was the youngest in a family of 11 children, 10 of whom grew to maturity. As mentioned, Grandma Emmaline's father passed away when she was just 15 months old. When Grandma was about 5 years old, her sister Marianne welcomed a suitor to their home. Grandma Emmaline, being the youngest in the family, was rather curious to know what their courtship was all about. She became so inquisitive and restless that the young man promised her a dime if she could just sit still for 5 minutes. Later, when that suitor, Anthony Stevenson, became Emmaline's brother-in-law, he made that dime into a ring for her. Apparently, not being able to sit still was an ongoing dilemma for Grandma Emmaline. Her first day of school was at the home of a lady named Soraya Tyler, but Emmaline's education only lasted 1 day that winter. Apparently, she just could not sit still. Her mother, Jane, was quite indulgent, so she got off easy and wasn't required to go back to Miss Tyler's class. When Emmaline attended school in earnest, she said that the teacher, known as Aunt Lottie, was very kind, and she loved her dearly. However, most of the male teachers in Grandma Emmaline's education tended to be very strict and oftentimes cruel with their corporal punishment. Her classroom didn't have many of the necessities associated with a schoolroom. The drinking fountain, well, it was a bucket of water and a long-handled dipper. They used individual slates to do their arithmetic and spelling. They had paper on which to write compositions and draw maps. Grandma Emmaline remembered when the soldiers from Camp Floyd used to travel to Fort Cameron, east of Beaver, Utah. They always stopped in Holden for a day or two. She said that even the word soldier sent a horrible sensation through her, and the sight of one frightened her out of her senses. She said that townspeople considered themselves safe after the army bugle was sounded in the evening. After the soldiers left town, the youngsters would search their campground for money and other little notions that they'd left behind. One of Grandma Emmaline's favorite memories was when she became old enough to join the Mutual Improvement Association, known as MIA. She especially enjoyed being old enough to attend the Relief Society dance, which was held on March 17th each year. There was always a doorkeeper, and no strangers were allowed to enter unless they had a recommendation. Grandma Emmaline loved dancing the quadrille, the waltz, the polka, the Danish slide-off, and the Scotch reel. In the summertime, the young folks would have apple and peach cutting bees. After the work was done, a picnic was served, and then lots of games were enjoyed. As a young adult, Grandma Emmaline became a Sunday school teacher. She said that her class was a mixed crowd that studied the Book of Mormon and the Articles of Faith. She loved teaching Sunday school and dearly loved the members of her class. It was about this time that Grandma Emmaline met Joseph Conrad Beckstrand. He and his father, Elias August Beckstrand, had traveled from their home in Meadow to attend a quarterly conference. Being a good friend of Emmaline's brother-in-law, James Stevenson, Elias and his son Joseph were invited to dinner. Brother Stevenson's wife was Jane Bennett Stevenson, the older sister of Emmaline, and it just so happened that Emmaline was helping her sister Jane prepare the meal. That was the first acquaintance of Joseph Conrad Beckstrand and Emmaline Bennett. After that day, however, Joe routinely made the 32-mile round trip to visit Emmaline on Sunday afternoons. My great-grandparents, Joseph Conrad and Emmaline Bennett Beckstrand, were married October 25, 1893, in the Manti Temple by John D. T. McAllister. They made the trip to Manti in a covered wagon, accompanied by Emmaline's mother, Jane, and Joe's half-sister, Albertina. It took 5 days to make the trip. When they arrived back in Holden, a wedding reception was waiting for them at the home of Emmaline's sister, Mary Ann Stevenson. Grandma Emmaline said, "All of our friends and relatives were invited, and in contrast to the wafer and punch served at wedding receptions nowadays, my sisters served a regular banquet with chicken, cake, pies, plum puddings, all kinds of vegetables, fruits, and relishes. After dinner, we all went to the amusement hall for a dance." The Beckstrand newlyweds moved into what was known as the Old Beckstrand home on Center Street in Meadow. The home was available because Joe's father, Elias August, had recently completed a new home on the east edge of town. Grandpa Joe continued to farm in the summer and freight in the winter. However, as the railroad expanded, his work transporting freight by wagon soon ceased. Joe and Emmaline wanted a home of their own, so Grandpa Joe, along with Jess Bennett and Joseph Stott, made adobe bricks so that they could build their own homes. Grandma Emmaline recalled selling one of their very best cows for $13 so that they could buy lumber for their new home. It was built 2 blocks east of Main Street and 1 block south of Center Street. My great-grandpa Joe was hired by the government as an Indian agent. He surveyed and marked individual plots for farming, helped the natives in the area arrange employment, distributed governmental supplies, and helped resolve conflicts. He gained such favor with the local Pavan Indians that they affectionately referred to him as Joe Government. It's fun for me to realize what a frontier lifestyle my great-grandparents lived. They were acquainted with Chief Kanosh and his wife Sally. They had detailed knowledge of the elaborate burial of Chief Walker in the canyon east of Meadow. They were friends with Hunkup and his wife Susie. The townspeople of Meadow worked together to benefit their little community. In autumn, a committee arranged to have wood hauled, chopped, and stacked for the ward meeting house and for the widows in town. It took 2 men a full day to get a load of wood. After the wood was in, the townspeople would meet at the schoolhouse for a community supper. In the wintertime, after a deep snow had accumulated, the men and boys of Meadow would gather for community rabbit hunts. Apparently, there were an abundance of rabbits on the north and south ends of town. The hunters would sometimes net the hares, but most were killed with clubs or guns. After the hunts, once again, a community dinner and dance were held. Joe and Emmaline Beckstrand were integral parts of their community. Grandpa Joe was very interested in politics. He was a staunch Republican and was the precinct chairman for about 20 years. He never sought any high political position, but rather was content to live the life of an honorable Christian man. Grandpa Joe was known for his selflessness and generosity. He often gave his belongings to those in need. For example, he had a good, working grain binder. Relatives and friends kept asking to borrow parts from it, and by the end of the summer, he had loaned practically every part of the machinery to townspeople in need. He was left with a useless grain binder, stripped of nearly all of its working parts. On another occasion, he did the same thing with a Model T Ford that he had. Grandma Emmaline always said that he would give his last nickel and then wish he had some more to give. Aunt Edith told me that her father was known for having the gift of healing. When someone in Meadow was sick or injured, Grandpa Joe was called on to give priesthood blessings. Grandpa Joe seemed to attract people who were in trouble. It was a common thing for men and women alike to come to him for advice. If someone in town became drunk, disorderly, or violent, Grandpa Joe was called on for his strong, calm, reassuring temperament. He was never too busy to help anyone who needed him. He was trusted and respected by everyone in Meadow. Grandma Emmaline served for many years as a member of the Meadow Ward Relief Society presidency, first as the secretary, then for 8 years as the president. She also served in the presidency of the Mutual Improvement Association, known today as Young Women's. Grandma Emmaline was musical. She could play the piano, and she loved to sing. She enjoyed her time in the Meadow Ward Choir. She attributed her musical gifts to the fact that she was Welsh. Grandma Emmaline was honored to be the first registered member in the Meadow camp of the Daughters of Utah Pioneers. She held the office of captain in the Meadow camp and enjoyed her Daughters of the Utah Pioneer membership very much. Grandpa Joe loved to visit. When people would come to their home, Grandma Emmaline would feel terrible if Grandpa Joe wasn't there to entertain them. When his brothers would return to Meadow from Salt Lake City, they would all sit on the fence at Grandpa Joe's home or across the road at his brother Nephi's home. They would talk and laugh by the hour. This was all fine and dandy unless Grandma Emmaline needed some wood chopped so that she could cook dinner. My great-grandparents were affectionate and kind. My Aunt Nelda told me that she loved it when her Grandpa Beckstrand would come over, lift her over his shoulder, and dance around singing, "I've got a sack of taters." Even so, when Grandpa Joe made up his mind about something, his children knew that no amount of coaxing or bawling would do any good. He had twinkling blue eyes, but those stark blue eyes could almost shoot fire when he got angry. Joseph and Emmaline established well-defined rules in their home, and their children knew that those rules were not to be broken. Something that was never tolerated in the Beckstrand home were playing cards or face cards. One night, when some of Aunt Edith's friends were at her home for a party, one of the boys brought out his cards. The first thing that Aunt Edith knew, her father was calling to her from the bedroom. In no uncertain terms, He told her to get rid of those cards, or he would get up and do it for her. Needless to say, Aunt Edith got rid of the cards. My great-grandparents were proud of their children's talents and always encouraged them to use their talents whenever they were given an opportunity. When I think back on all of the Beckstrand reunion programs, most, if not all, of the talent portion consisted of the descendants of Joseph Conrad and Emmaline Beckstrand. My great-grandparents wanted their children to have a good education. They encouraged their children and grandchildren to be lifelong learners. Most of their descendants have received an excellent education. Many have college degrees, including master's degrees and PhDs. I'm certain that my great-grandparents would be pleased. My great-grandpa